Clunes Booktown Festival is a celebration of the book, filled with bookstalls, author talks, workshops and thought-provoking conversations in the historic Victorian township of Clunes.
I want to begin by acknowledging the Djadja Wurrung people whose country we're on. We want to pay our respects to their seniors and leaders, past, present and emerging, particularly from us seniors in our world too. What I'm going to do here today, is to just very quickly introduce our three writers in terms of their current books. And then we're going to watch a 2-minute film. It's only 2 minutes, I assure you, and that will set the mood. This film comes from Clunes, so it's from the Clunes people. So let's start with Carol. Carol is down here. This is at the end. And Carol's book, Bloomer, is a beautiful meditation. It's a thinking about what it is to turn 70. It's as if we went and visited Carol in her garden every week and sat down over a cup of tea and talked about everything, absolutely everything. Nothing is off the table here. Carol is a novelist and she has been extremely generous in being open and talking about the things that she feels deeply. But it's all seeped with the garden and nature. And so it's called Bloomer and obviously Boomer. Then we have three very different writers, so three very different opinions on things. The next is Anna in the middle. And Anna's one of those writers that the rest of us really secretly hate because she's got this book's being published in the US and Canada and New York and blah, 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 and probably will be made into a film or a mini-series. And, it's just going to sell millions of copies, Okay, radio. Okay. It's a wonderful page turner. If you haven't read it, you want to grab it and read it on the way home. The Borrowed Life of Frederick, Fife. And Frederick has an accident. He's homeless. He bumps into an old man. He's an older man. He bumps into this guy who's in a wheelchair who has carked it. They both have this little accident, and because all old people sort of look alike, don't we? We sort of do, don't we? Yes, we're a bit invisible. Anyway, so Frederick, who is homeless, is mistaken for this old guy who's been out on a special outing for the home. So he's taken back to the home, and he can't believe his luck at 3 meals a day and a bed and all the rest of it, and the company. But more importantly, this book is about love. It's the most amazing book about various different aspects of love. So that's what holds it together. So it's a great read and it's about a very serious issue. And then we have our radical here at the end, Brian Castro. And Brian Castro is the Chinese postman, is also a take on being of a senior age and is also set in the Adelaide Hills, and he has 2 acres there. It's a series of individual paragraphs, each of them beautifully crafted. They're like stamps in an album. And you look at that stamp for a while, but then the whole album has a sort of story as well. So there's a background narrative of a woman from the Ukraine who's emailing him. And each of these paragraphs are both him and not him. There's an I and a not I in there. So it's absolutely exquisite. If you've read Orbital, for example, that won the Booker Prize recently, it's a slow read. This is a slow read. You pick it up, you read a paragraph, you put it down. You come back, you read a paragraph. Thank you. So now the 2-minute film. Thank you.
My name is Tess. I'm 75 years old. And we want to talk about ageing with attitude.
Hi, I'm Sue. I'm nearly 67 and I love ageing. I love to learn new things and now I've got time to do it.
I'm Malcolm. I'm 63 and I've been having the conversation with my children about farm succession planning. If we fail to plan, we plan to fail.
My name's Pauline. I don't think of myself as a working person anymore, but I still do a fair amount of work.
Community volunteering,
looking after grandchildren,
working for money, caring for a dying partner or friend.
Invisibility was something I wasn't prepared for in any way, shape or form.
People are well-meaning, but they tell me what I want. They talk down to me and they keep the power to themselves.
I don't want to be a client. I want to be a participant.
I have a lot more confidence. I know what I like and I know what I don't like.
I make sure my voice is heard, but I'm softer and more understanding. So I do it in a way that's not going to offend people. Who's got the energy to argue?
My identity is no longer attached to my children, or perhaps even to my husband. There's a freedom to be found in ageing.
What excites me about Attitude is our community.
We're about creating with people, not necessarily for people.
Attitude is an idea about ageing well in place. It's also about a building for the community here in Clunes.
We are a third of the residents of Clunes, and that's particularly true for most Australian country towns.
Ageing well is about having autonomy, a sense of community, financial security, and also be prepared for surprises yet to come.
So that starts us like this, doesn't it? Are there any statements in that particularly ring true for you, or is there something else any of you would like to add to that list of litanies?
Well, it's a great community, for one thing. I mean, I'm very different. I'm incredibly solitary, but it looks as though the atmosphere, the camaraderie is the wonderful thing about this group and this place, I think. Whereas I have a different attitude. Of course, the attitude of mine is to be more solitary, less talkative, and think a lot more. But by the same token, I've always been enthralled by people who say our community is everything. I would like to die in that community, and it's a wonderful thing. I think that can happen to people, and they don't feel alone. I've never felt alone. I've been solitary, but not alone.
Can you tell us something about that difference for you?
Well, I think someone said loneliness is solitude which has been unfulfilled. Which is, I think, if you're solitary and you have solitude, you are not lonely.
Yes.
You have animals, you have things around you, and you tend to meditate on that, not so much on negative things, but you deal with nature, and nature is so important to be in rather than out.
Yes, absolutely. Carol, what do you think?
Well, coincidentally, one of the chapters in Bloomer is around the topic of loneliness. And when I started writing this, I was thinking that possibly the statistics might show that older people were lonely, but the surprising fact that emerged was that it's 18 to 24-year-olds who are actually the loneliest. But there is a loneliness epidemic happening in Australia, and I feel greatly compassionate for the 18 to 24-year-olds, these so-called digital natives, who are navigating friendships in a way that we didn't have to when we were growing up, this sort of my generation, Brian's generation. And they're finding it tough to find a way through. And also one of the other things that came up was that the whole system of co-housing, so that's becoming a form of housing that is more community-based, that's said to be going to become a mainstream way of living in Australia as time goes on and more older people are on their own. Instead of living on their own and being lonely, they're seeking out these communities where they live in. They have small private dwellings, but a sort of communal centre in the middle. And so that's an interesting concept, I think. But somewhere like Clunes seems to be doing that, even without it, being necessarily spelled out.
Yes, we certainly have very communal times, but we also, I just love being at home quietly by myself. How about you, Anna? What resonates for you?
I think obviously the talk of invisibility that happens with ageing is certainly very relevant to my book and relevant to my experience in aged care. I actually started off on the path to becoming a doctor, but was so drawn to working in aged care when my grandfather Fred was diagnosed with dementia and moved there. And my experience showed, I think, two things. One, that the invisibility that happens with aging. I think there's a line in my book that says, you know, you'd be surprised how differently people treat you when you're older. You don't feel any different, but it's as though you fade away like a Polaroid picture in reverse. And I think particularly for people who have any kind of diagnosis like dementia, it's almost like a stamp that, you know, whatever that person is saying is not taken seriously. And in my book, there is one man that's mistaken for another, and the man who has passed away did have early signs of dementia. So when poor Fred is trying to explain that, no, he's not that man, they're like, oh, yes, you know, you're confused again, and it's so degrading. But I saw this time and time again in my work in aged care, that invisibility, and certainly also the loneliness that can exist in nursing homes. Even being surrounded by, you know, 100 other residents doesn't mean that you won't be lonely, and the effect that that can have on your mental and physical health. I think they say it's equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So, yeah.
It is. We know that. It's something like 6 years of your life you lose if you stay at home and don't talk to anybody.
Yes.
So be careful. I myself and me, they're very good company, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, you talk about this in your book too.
The invisibility of older people is really an expression of the endemic ageism in our culture. Talking about aging with attitude, I think the important thing we need to know as we're getting older is that ageism is incredibly damaging, and that the most damaging form of ageism is when we turn it on ourselves and we think we're too old to do this or too old to do that. Or probably the other damaging aspect is when we become slightly invisible to our medical professionals. You know, they don't, or medicines and treatments become rationed according to age, that sort of thing. I mean, you can take that quite a long way, and there are some horrific stories of people suggesting that at 75 we should all just commit suicide and make and seriously an ecologist or somebody in the US put that forward as a sensible idea. And I think in the Nixon regime time there was talk about rationing medical treatment for older people, and there's a beautiful film that's been made by this Japanese filmmaker whose name I'm not going to remember, but it's called Project 75, and the premise of it is that the Japanese government will offer people money at 75 to commit suicide, and the whole thing is set up so that they can counsel them how they're going to go about it, and they take the money, $1,000 or whatever it is, and they can give it to their grandchildren, or they can spend it and have a good last fling before they go. And gradually the awful thing that arises in the film is that you can see it's being manipulated so that people are being encouraged not to refuse it, you know. So that's taking it to a next level, but that's where invisibility could lead us, and ageism could lead us, and why we need to resist it really strongly.
That film was formed from an ageist situation. We went to talk to a group, and we were massively overtalked. This was a group of care providers and caregivers and those sort of people, that industry, and they overtalked us, and we were so angry. And they overtalked us because they didn't think we had anything worthwhile saying. This is the really interesting thing. You know, we had nothing to say. So that was the film that came out of that experience.
It is. And when I was talking to older people, having conversations with them for writing the book, that came up time and time again, how they'd often be overlooked if they were standing at a counter waiting to be served. And, you know, we need to resist. That's why I'm wearing my Resist Ageism badge or button. And I've got plenty of them, so if anyone else wants to wear one, come and see me afterwards, and we can say that this is where the anti-aging movement started, in Clunes.
Absolutely. Well, of course, even here in Australia, the medical science stops running tests at certain ages, because if you get those ailments, they're probably not going to do much about it.
I think that's a relief, actually. I stay away from them. I don't want to be tested. I don't want to go near any of it. In fact, aging with attitude to me is to act your age and exaggerate your age, so that I sometimes limp and I get really decrepit on the bus, and I always get a seat. So I'm the grand old man. And yes, I get treated badly sometimes, but by the same token, I'm still insisting. But the other danger is, like Michael Mosley, you're a man, usually man of 60 or over, trying to think you're 30. And, you just should act your age, not over-exaggerate, but you could actually stand up for yourself in your age. You've got more wisdom, more experience than any of those young people on social media who try to ignore you. And I just simply won't be ignored,
I was going to say, I think that's just wonderful, firstly, and I'm going to keep those ideas in mind for when, the bad back and everything. But I think, ageism is still very much apparent in our society. And I think, something I'm really passionate about as an author is the representation of older characters, both in literature and in film, and the way that can shape our views. Because so often older characters are caricatured or stereotyped. And there's a form of ageism that is very prevalent at the moment, which is ableism, which is valorising characters because they've still got it, or they can hold on to these youthful traits. So we're seeing shows like Grace and Frankie, which are wonderful, but they're in the spotlight because they can wear stilettos, they can run businesses. There's shows about men still going to the moon. And I'm really interested in books like Fred, which is set in a nursing home. It displays aging in all its glory with the leaky prostates and the aching knees. But to say that, heroism can come at any age and you don't have to save someone from a burning building to be a hero. And Fred's superpower is his kindness, to treat anyone with kindness, and he truly saves people through that. And so I think that, successful aging is not defined by how well you can hold on to your youth, but seeing aging as a equally valuable part of life, and a part that is absolutely worth savouring. And it's a privilege because not everyone gets to do it.
Well, that's exactly right. And just when we were sitting talking, Brian told me that someone I have known in my life for quite some time is apparently quite ill. Not another one. Many of us feel that so many of our colleagues two of the founders of Booktown are no longer with us, that were my comrades that I worked with. So many people have died, and we are left. And we are left with this gift of life. And what I've been talking to a lot of people about is just exactly that. We don't want to jump the tall buildings anymore. We don't want to pretend we're 30 anymore. But what is it we want to do? How do we take this gift of life and move forward with that, with this extraordinary gift? You look worried.
Well, I might be worried. I think it's a question of, the question is, when is it okay to actually become an old man or an old woman? Do you become an old woman at 70? Is that okay? I never hear anyone admitting to it or wanting to be it. The fact is that we've been conditioned all through our growing years, and apparently children as young as 4 start to pick up on the social clues in the culture about how we feel about older people. And I grew up certainly hearing parents say that someone was over the hill, or they were mutton dressed as lamb. At the same time, I just want to note that ageism is not simply about old people. It's not just about being nicer to old people. It affects young people too. You can be too young, considered too young for something, too young. Haven't you moved out of home yet? Got your own place? Too young for that job. So it's aging. It's not like a final destination. It's like a process that's gradually unfolding through the whole of life. And we're all at different stages on that continuum, on the path. If we were hiking some perilous path through the Himalayas, we'd all be on different points on the path. And maybe we want to know from the people up ahead what the terrain was like, where the dodgy bits were and so on. So we'd be listening, but we're not really listening. We're not passing information well between the generations. And there's this angry sort of background buzz, intergenerational buzz. Boomers are responsible for everything. They were lucky, and now, we've all got it bad. But each generation has its challenges. Each generation grows through and with what it has. And I think if we understood a bit more about what formed and shaped each generation, we'd feel more compassion, and we'd lose that sort of where we're pitting one generation against another or blaming one generation for everything.
I think that's so relevant. And the question of how old is old, like, you said, when do you become old? Part of the problem in literature, and it's the same as what happens in nursing homes, is, that there has been an increase, a positive increase in the number of older protagonists in books. But when you look at some of the most celebrated texts that are cited, they include a man called Uwe. Uwe is 59. He's 59. So that gets put on the same shelf as the 100-year-old man who climbed out of the window. So there is a 41-year-old gap between that generation, and yet they're all put as this blanket statement of old. And we would never do that. We would never say a 5-year-old protagonist is the same as a 40-year-old protagonist. Yeah. And yet we do it all the time in film and literature. We just think, well, if they've got grey hair or whatever it is, they're old. And so the same happens in nursing homes where they're seen as a homogenous group. And yet we had a mother and a son in a nursing home with a 25-year age gap. And so I think we really need to, it's almost part of the ageism is that we think this is one homogenous group, whereas we're on different stages of that journey, and it's important to recognise that.
That's probably why I'm solitary. I cultivate my own garden and I pretend that I'm a writer. But I did philosophy in university, and I was very impressed by René Descartes, the French philosopher. He was one of those, what they called armchair philosophers. He sat in front of the fire and he said the mind was much more important than the body, and that I think, therefore I am. That was his great quote. And he was predated by Montaigne, another French philosopher. This is 1600s that we're talking about, who said quite the opposite. He said, my body makes up its mind. And Montaigne rode his horse every day until he got thrown and he was almost dying. Then he got back on the horse and he said, I'm always going to bring a spare horse now. So never give up. And so I changed my whole philosophy. I thought Montaigne taught you how to live and also how to die. So I was putting Descartes before the horse, I think. And Montaigne said, I would like to die in the tavern down the road because that's where all my friends are. And they all have a drink for me and I'll die amongst them. In reality, it didn't happen. He was very, very ill. And he organized a mass. Got the priest to say high mass. And all his friends came, all the alcoholics came. And he died during the mass. So that was another way of being together.
Yes, it is another way of being together. Yeah, absolutely. So do you think that, when the boomer, sorry, this is the boomer question now, awful of me. But when we were going through youth, we sort of developed youth, and now we're kind of developing old age. We're developing the aging position, and that's why there isn't a blueprint for it. You feel that there's not a, we don't know which way to go and what to wear and how to be, and, does anybody else feel that it's breaking new ground on this territory?
No, my stepdaughter once said to me, and she's here, sorry, Benny, she said, when you drive, you're like a moving speed hump. So I keep the others in behind me.
Oh,
yeah.
But you do, don't you?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we don't pay much attention to our aging, and consequently then it sneaks up on us. I think the first time I sort of got a bit of a drift of it, I was on the cusp of 50. And I'd come back to Australia to see my mother, and I was in the kitchen one night cooking a meal and the radio was on. And it was Radio National, and there was this woman was interviewing older women about how they felt about aging. And I sort of only had one ear on it until I heard her say, and how do you feel about the thinning of your pubic hair? And I went, what? Is that even possible? And I thought, well, it's something that needs keeping an eye on, definitely. And then, but of course I didn't keep an eye on it. I just cooked dinner and forgot it. And then the next thing I knew, I was on the cusp of 70. And all of a sudden, that thing that woman said 20 years ago, yes, it was very possible. And but the only good thing was there was more to worry about by then than thinning, pubic hair. I mean, well, there was thinning eyebrows. And I think if it was an either-or situation, most women I know would keep their eyebrows, wouldn't they? But so what happens, I think, is it's more like aging is like a bad news headline we scroll past thinking this could never happen here. And then one day we look up and, oh, my God, here we are at the cusp of 70. And I felt that very much, like at the cusp of 70, I thought, hell, how did that happen? How did I get here? And what do I do now? And what do I think about this? I haven't done the thinking, I don't know I'm going to go forward. How am I going to be? Am I an old woman? Am I, what am I? So I started turning to books as I always do. And that's when I discovered that older women in fiction are either stereotyped or they're just the demented or the interfering or the fading or something, They didn't look like the older women I know who were, going about their lives, doing interesting things. And so that was the first thing I thought, well, this has got to be remedied. But there's so much to be remedied, isn't there?
Yeah, there is.
And I had to do the thinking for myself because most of the people in my family I could have asked were gone. My grandparents were all gone. My mother at that stage was only a very little at the end of her life. And although she seemed to be quite sharp mentally still, she didn't want to talk about the past or anything too serious. And I don't really know why I couldn't get her to talk. So she belonged to that generation that they were known as the silent generation. And that's one of the things that formed our generation. We were raised by people that didn't talk to us. They didn't tell us anything. We had to more or less raise ourselves in some respects. Like even at puberty, no one told you what was going to happen. They just gave you a leaflet and you get on with it, This is what's going to happen. Don't tell anyone. And then we sort of had a brutal education
more
system.
about sanitary napkins than anything else, weren't you?
Yeah.
Do you think there's a big difference between women and men here, that women get more of this kind of flack than men do?
I think it's definitely men and women experience aging differently. There's the whole beauty industry. Don't even let us maybe get started on that. We could talk for the rest of the afternoon on the anti-aging and the age-defying and actually all the sort of defying and denying of age. It's separating us from our experience of time, and time is one of the great mysteries of the universe, isn't it? So it's actually sort of separating us from our interaction with nature and how things are in the universe. My view anyway.
Yeah, well, just on the anti-aging, absolutely, we could talk about it for hours, but it really shapes us from a very young age as to how we view aging. I have 2 daughters and they're seeing all these ads, on the TV and for kids that have social media, anti-aging. And so it's like if you have any signs of aging, you must erase them, no matter what serum or cream or, and now digital aging, with all the filters you can tap and you can look 10 years younger. And it's an incredibly dangerous space that we've put aging as this huge thing to be feared rather than embraced. So I'm hoping that, we need to start from the ground level up and people's perception, and we're not seeing these because of, the anti-aging revolution. We're actually seeing less grey hair, less wrinkles because people think that they have to cover everything up. And therefore it's not normalised. And the same thing with dementia, when people have dementia, they're normally closed away in a locked nursing home wing rather than being a part of the community. Something that I'm very passionate about is these dementia villages, whereby there's a safe sort of little village based on a town where people with dementia can go to the shops, they can go to the cinema, doesn't matter if they have the right money. But the best thing about it is that people from outside the community, whether you have a loved one there or not, can go in. And so there's this intergenerational exposure to aging, to dementia, and it becomes normalised. And, Mr. Rogers, the American TV presenter, he sort of had this thing, he said, anything mentionable is manageable. And so I think we need to mention all of these things, you know, even the pubic hair. We need to be able to mention, you know, these big scary things and to actually show kids and to show the younger generation that it's okay. It's okay to age. And if you do age, you are still the hero of your own story. You shouldn't be relegated to a sidekick character, you know. What happens when Aragorn has more nasal hair than hair on top of his head and he's got a cane instead of a sword? Is he suddenly only worthy of being a quirky side character or a stereotyped character? I would say absolutely not. We need to see people forward and front who say that ageing is okay and it's valuable and it's normal.
Yeah, I think one of the what you've just mentioned, one of the biggest things is dementia, which they still haven't found how to deal with it, except lock people away in nursing home. And I can only speak for myself in that at night I hardly sleep and I go through the alphabet to remind me of all the people that I know, their names and why have I forgotten them. And I sing the alphabet song and I go through and I think of crossword puzzles, which is you're an expert at. I'm learning 3 languages, gone back to playing music on the keyboard and the saxophone. So all of these things, they're hard, they're not easy, but it's a challenge to finding something different and not going down the same track. I've got to be a writer, I've got to be a writer. That all happened years ago, decades ago. So it's time now to kind of, in my age, 75, time to say, okay, that's not that important. But other things really are interesting. So I love splitting wood.
I don't like splitting wood.
And I like machinery, log splitters. And I maintain them, and they're all very logical and all very interesting. And I've discovered whole new life, a whole new world.
Yes, that's what I'm finding very interesting, actually, that opportunity to discover something else. Recently, over summer, we had a lot of cockies here and they shooed out the magpies. And the magpies have recently come back. And I found myself being incredibly happy that the magpies were back, you know, and I thought, what is this? Why am I so happy about this, you know? So I'm wondering if that's something else also embraces the outdoor, the environment, nature. Yours is set very much in nature. You keep talking about your farm and your dogs, and not your farm, but your acreage and your dogs in chopping wood. How do we feel about that? Do we come to it in a different way, do you think, or is there something going on here?
Well, for me, it's the garden, and it's been shown that actually being in contact with the soil, there are bacteria in the soil that help us to release serotonin in the brain and make us happy. If we eat something that we've actually grown ourselves, we get a rush of dopamine, and that's, you know, looking back to 200,000 years or something of hunter-gathering rising up in us when we eat the tomatoes that we've just grown. But human beings, I think, there's been a lot of study around this so-called biophilia, which is a need for connection with the living world and the natural world, and that when we have that, we're happier. And it doesn't really matter whether it's a few pot plants on a windowsill. One of the things in Bloomer is that a friend whose husband is in residential care with dementia told me that he had been a gardener when he was living at home, and in aged care, he is always stealing pot plants and even teacups off the tea trolley and things and filling them with soil in the garden and putting little cuttings into them, and he's got his windowsill packed with these. And she said her mother used to do that as well, but she used to take cuttings from the artificial plants in the care home and then complain bitterly when they wouldn't grow. But the other very touching thing was
a line for Anna, isn't it? That's a line that you'll have to use.
Take it for the. But she said that the ladies with walkers would go out in the gardens and pick flowers and decorate their walkers. And if there were no flowers, they would cut pictures of flowers out of magazines and stick them on. It's that, she said, even though her husband he didn't know a lot of people and had lost a lot of his, faculties, he hadn't lost that urge to connect with garden, with greenery and nature, and to grow things. So there's got to be something there, hasn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd say the same with music and with art, that those are the things that are very deep within. And yeah, so important with people with dementia as well, to not ever assume that because they can't do one thing that they can't do another. That's a very typical thing that I saw in aged care. Was like, we had one gentleman who, because he could no longer feed himself, it was assumed that he could no longer draw. And he loved drawing and he loved animals. And so we, of course, ignored that assumption and gave him a pen and a pad of paper, and he sat down and drew the most beautiful picture of a horse. And, you know, to this day, it remains the most moving piece of art I've ever seen. And I'm lucky enough to have been to the Louvre. So challenging those assumptions about what people can do is just so important in our ageing community.
Before we throw to the audience, because I've got to keep an eye on the time, let's talk about the thing that's in all of your books, which is love. And, you know, so often we see pictures of people of my age falling in love, walking along a beach or something hand in hand. I mean, just dreadful. Or, you know, they're so appalling, you know. But you've all dealt with love in different ways. So let's talk about love that you're talking about here. Brian, do you want to start?
Yeah, well, love is also friendship. Mm-hmm. And, you know, in my book, Quinn, the old man, has a visitor, and this visitor is a much older man who comes and doesn't talk much because he has no teeth and he doesn't eat, and he just helps on the property. So friendships develop, but also romantic love is, of course, way behind us. I don't know about you, but
I'll put it behind.
Romantic love, I think, is the greatest loneliness you can have, because it's only you and the lover, or perhaps it's not requited, and you are in this terrible, lonely world because you actually want to tell the world you're in love, but you nobody cares.
Oh, okay.
So, you know, you have your own little world, and then, you know, that goes, and then, you know, you have another one, etc., and it's becomes serial. But it's not a solution to anything, I don't think. It's a terrible wastage of life. So that's my cynical.
But Quinn falls in love, doesn't he, really?
He falls in love by letter.
By letter.
And he's infatuated with letter writing and the eros of letter writing.
And the whole,
and now the whole thing could be a scam, right?
Yeah.
And that's what happens. I mean, people over 60 are always scammed by lovers.
Yeah.
From overseas, you know, writing in and saying, you're wonderful, blah, blah, blah. And that's how it goes. But they're not very deep and they're very shallow. And after 2 lines, you say, okay, this is a scam.
Yeah. It's almost a Beatrice character, was it? Yes. Your book is full of love. Tell us, Anna.
So my book deals with lost love a lot, with grief, the grief of, you know, this wonderful romance of the ages, which is based on my grandparents' love. It's also speaks about the love of a couple with one of them with dementia and the other one does not have dementia, and that's it really changes love, and it's a very interesting thing to explore. And it's such a common occurrence these days, is that, you know, that you've had this couple that's been together for 50 years and suddenly one of them is diagnosed with dementia, and the grief of that for the other person. It also deals with the love between a father and a child, and, you know, the longing for a child, and that's a very special relationship. And also, as Brian said, friendship, and how important that is at any age, in any condition, is that connection and that human touch, which not everyone has.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you talk about you don't even mix it, you know, you don't step away from it. You talk about sexual love, touch, that whole genre in aging. Tell us about
Yeah, I became interested in what the rights of older people are to have intimate relationships in an aged care setting, because it does happen. Well, it started really because a friend of mine told me that someone she knew had gone in to visit their mother in aged care and found her in her nightdress in the arms of somebody that wasn't their father, or somebody they didn't know, and was absolutely horrified by this. And the relationship persisted, and in the end, the aged care staff had to move their beds into the one room so that they could be near each other. And the family eventually had to accept that this was what these two people wanted. And so I started investigating. Older people do have rights. I mean, it's treated differently in within different aged care homes, sometimes not very well. But there's also, where there's dementia, there's also raises the question of consent too, because there are many sexual assaults that take place within that setting. So it's a very, very difficult area to navigate, but older people do have rights, and, you know, we should respect that. I also think about different kinds of love, and I think that for many women might be surprised to find that the last great love affair of their lives is with their grandchildren, that suddenly this unexpected outpouring of love happens. You know, and that's a really important relationship. It can be a reason. You know, we need to, in order to make our old age, our you know, this time that we've got here valuable to ourselves, we need to find purpose in it and ways to grow. And even if that purpose is simply being there for our grandchildren, passing on to them family history, legacy, stories, whatever, then that can be a valuable reason. I mean, there's so-called blue zones around the world where people commonly live to great old ages. One of the things about those places is that they've isolated a few things that keep people going, and one of them is this sense of purpose, waking up with a sense of purpose every morning.
Yes.
And I think that
the blue zones.
The blue zones.
Blue zones. You all know about blue zones, where parts of the world where people live a very old age.
Yeah. Community,
food,
treating food as medicine, often, yes, and a friendship group, and purpose.
Purpose, very important. Yes, amazing things. Have any of you got a question for our panelists?
Traditionally, it's always been, you know, men age, they become more distinguished, and women just get ruined, you know. So that is the unfairness of it all. And I think it's going back to that question again of when is it okay to become an old woman, and what is the value in that, and how do we stand up for our right to be an old woman? And recently I've started saying, I asked myself, what, you know, am I going to admit to my age? There was a long time when I wouldn't admit to it. So we were taught to hide it, defy it, and, you know, if it came up in conversation, steer the conversation away or something. I think Susan Sontag in the 1970s wrote about the difference between male and female aging, and she said it was women's dirty little secret, you know, their age. Never ask a woman her age. That used to be the thing. And you become described as a woman of a certain age. And I was in the library one day. I was trying to join the library, and the man at the computer, this middle-aged man, was typing in my name and my address, and it came to this little box for my age. And he said, I don't think woman of a certain age will fit in here. And it was like something I just snapped. It's like it was the first time I actually sort of felt rage about this. And I said, you know what? No need to try, because I'm a woman of a specific age. We all are. And this is the number, put it in. And so he did. And I think we have to take control for ourselves and start standing up for ourselves. It's okay to be old. Carl Jung said, life is an arc. Youth is the morning, middle age is noon, and old age is the afternoon. And the afternoon is as valuable as the morning. We have to live by that.
And just to add to that, I think one of the biggest compliments that you hear is, oh, you don't look 50, you don't look 70, oh, you couldn't be old enough to have grandchildren. Please stop saying that, because it implies that looking your age is not okay, that it's bad. And it really is one of those phrases that idealizes youth. So when someone says that to me, I'll ask them politely sometimes to not use that compliment, because it's just that thing of, you know, that it's not okay to look 60. And what does looking 60 look like? Anyway, it will look different for everyone. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I get that too. But sometimes I just say, oh, thank you so much. I'm really 95. Yeah. No, that's my way of dealing.
And the other phrase that gets me is age is just a number. Don't say that, because it diminishes the value of age. It is more than a number. You've earned this, you know. Be proud of it.
I think it's an American phenomenon, and we're very lucky not to follow them. And they are so obsessed with being young, as you were saying, the beauty myth, etc. And it's social media, the pressure of social media that, you've got to be up with your peers or down with your peers if you're not. And the whole thing is becoming a cult. When you look at what is happening in America at the moment, it's reverting to a kind of pagan myth, really. They claim to be Christians, but they're not. And they are using pressure on people's minds to such an extent that they're eliminating all the traditions, all the values that we have. And if you go to Europe, you'll see quite the opposite. So I think that this kind of obsession with the new is a cult. It's a mythic cult.
It's around all the language that's used as well. Like, having a senior moment is like this bad thing. Well, I have whatever age I am moments like all the time. I lose things and I never say, I'm having a middle-aged moment, but let's redefine what a senior moment is. Nelson Mandela became president at 75. That's a senior moment.
And I think it's going to get worse because AI will completely underline that and keep going with it. And these are not people. It's robotic. So basically it's becoming to the stage where our rhetoric is governed by robots. Yeah, that's a very big danger to come.
Yesterday, the day before, it just has been all over the various feeds that AI has taken almost everybody's books, pirated everybody's books and fed them in to teach AI how to write. All of our books have been, everything is gone. So that was pretty disturbing, wasn't it?
Yeah. You can find your book if you're writing. You can find your book on Atlanta.com, the Atlantic.com, and you enter your book's name or your name, and you will see it all come up. So I think being present is so important. A lot of young kids don't want their oldies around or their grandparents or something like that, but just to be present. You don't need to enforce anything, and simply the things that if they come to you and ask you, then we give advice, and you're just a standing mentor, just because you're there. I think when people go missing, that's when bad things start to happen.
Okay, let's end on something really positive about being aged. Yeah, come on, everybody.
I think this is where we have to treat invisibility as a superpower, and you can get away with a lot, and yes. There's a woman in Melbourne, Deb Woods, I think, who experimented by she does paste ups which she puts on lanes like Hosier Lane and stuff like this. I think she's done some in Castlemaine of older women wearing tutus and with their mouths open screaming, and she'll often ask people walking past what they'd like the old woman to scream, and then she puts that on as well. And at first she thought she was going to be arrested for this, so she wore a high-vis vest and she got a friend there to spot for her for the police and stuff. But then she realised, hey, nobody took any notice of it all because she was invisible. They couldn't see her. So she just went around posting up heaps more. Yeah, you've got to take it where you can get it, I think.
Yeah.
I think it depends on the country too. Finland was just voted the most happy country in the world. Then comes a whole lot of other Scandinavian countries. And Australia's 11th and America's 24th. So that's where the happiness scale lies. And some of those societies, I know they're small, Finland, small population, but they look after their old people, and the old people are very much part of the community. So it's a different culture from this very isolated kind of young social media thing that we're following from America.
Oh, yeah, I was going to just say the intergenerational aspect of it is so important. That's why, the Old People's Home for 4-year-olds was such a beautiful program, not just for the residents of the nursing home, but for the younger children. And I would encourage everyone, if you don't have a relative or a loved one in a nursing home, go anyway, visit anyway. And if there are kids that don't have their grandparents around, find and seek older people in the community and talk to them and see how incredibly inspiring they are. When I was little, I didn't want to be a pilot or Taylor Swift or whatever. I wanted to be old because I saw my grandparents and I thought they were absolute rock stars because they changed the lives of those people around them, not in loud ways, but in gentle and magnificent ways.
And I think you have the freedom now, don't you, to do what it is you want to do. Do you find that?
There is a great freedom at this time, and it's probably why it feeds into this age group being the happiest. It's one of those things that feeds in there. But with that whole thing about your grandparents, they were modelling good old age for you, weren't they? And that's what's happening now with all this age denial and defying and all the rest of it. We're not modelling anything for young people. And even though young people aren't thinking about it now, they're absorbing it. And when their time comes, when they're listening to the radio at 50 and someone starts talking about pubic hair thinning, they're going to go, nobody told me about that. Or so, we could be having these conversations one at a time. We can change things one conversation at a time, but we have to have those conversations just quietly.
Absolutely.
My mother went into a nursing home and she loved it. She said, this is a great hotel. The servants are fantastic. So she died happy.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Don't forget, I'm going to take these guys down to the reading tents any moment. That's Brian's book. It's just amazing. There are paragraphs in there. There's a background story and it's very beautiful. They're like prose poems, aren't they? Yeah. And Carol's book, those of you who love the garden, love discussions, it's all here. It's 1,000 cups of tea. It's wonderful wisdom. You've seen what wisdom. And also there are images in here, photographs, and then the wonderful, very funny, laugh out loud page turner of Anna's book. So if you haven't got them, go down to Reading Tent. I'll bring them down. You can continue the conversation. Thank you.
Clunes Booktown Festival is presented by Creative Clunes. Tax-deductible donations to keep our stories alive can be made at creativeclunes.org.au. This podcast has been made possible due to the generous support of the Hugh Williamson Foundation.